Okay, everyone, welcome, welcome. Happy Saturday, and welcome to session two of Youth Leadership Training. We are super excited to have everybody joining us today. Hope you enjoyed last session if you were able to be with us last week, and are looking forward to today's session as well. Today we have a really wonderful set of panelists. We have Cal and Austin, and before we get started here, let me just double check the chat is good. Yep, we're good. All right, so before we get started, in just a minute here, go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're from, how old you are. And today's icebreaker is in theme with session two, social media and communications. If you could share one story with your community to encourage people to take action for the ocean, what would it be and why? So, as you guys are introducing yourselves in the chat, I will pass off that icebreaker question to both of our panelists. Austin, if you want to go first, you can go ahead.
Yeah, well, my name's Austin. I am 20 years old. I'm a student at the University of Washington in Seattle. And the story that I have been very lucky to be able to share with my community is about salmon, and specifically salmon in Seattle spawning streams that are oftentimes these little tiny streams in neighborhoods and communities like mine in a city just outside of Seattle, where we have a lot of salmon that not a lot of people know about because a lot of these streams flow underground in culverts underneath roads, and people drive over, walk over them, and have no clue. And so I get to teach people about how to be a better steward of our local salmon spawning streams.
That's awesome, Austin. And Cal, go ahead, share your story.
Morning, everyone. So great to be here. I'm from Australia, from Sydney, and the story that I share in my community is that young people can make a difference. So I feel like a lot of the time as young people, we always think that we can't get involved, we can't really contribute to these big global problems. And the story that I share, last year I've spoken to over 14,500 Australians all over the country. So share this story quite a lot is that we can make a difference as young people. And yeah, I'm a local politician where I live now, so got elected as the youngest ever politician, a year and a half ago now. So yeah, if there's anything that I've learned through getting into politics is that young people's voices are so needed, particularly at the moment.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing, both of you guys. Great to have you here. Like I said, we'll get started in a second. I just want to check the chat out. We've got a lot of friends joining us from all over the world, which is awesome. I see Sydney, Australia, another Australia, Solomon Islands, Singapore, England, St. Lucia, the Philippines, Papua New Guinea, Nigeria, England, another Philippines, somewhere else in the United States. It's really so cool to see so many folks joining us from so many different places all around the world. We're really happy to have you with us today. Okay, so just to get started, to give you guys a general overview of what to expect for the session today, I'm going over that right now. That's the first thing here. I'm going to introduce our panelists and then we'll head right into the discussion. We will have time for a Q&A at the end. Feel free to share any questions that you have in the chat throughout the panel discussion, but also the Zoom Q&A feature as well. And we will do our very best to hit as many of those questions as we can towards the end, and then just going over a couple of like updates and announcements at the end. Just to introduce myself, for those of you who are not familiar with me, my name is Laura Johnson. I am the former Youth Programs Manager of the Ocean Project and creator of Youth Leadership Training. I formerly managed the World Ocean Day Youth Advisory Council and the Alumni Network, and I'm really happy to still be working with the Ocean Project and World Ocean Day on this program. It means a lot to me to have all of you here and be with us today. And I'm also very excited to introduce our first panelist speaker, Cal. He is a World Ocean Day Youth Advisory Council alumni, but as he mentioned earlier, also has done a ton of really, really incredible things in his own community and around Australia. So I'll pass it off to Cal if you'd like to introduce yourself a little bit.
Yeah, so great to see you, Laura. Laura and I got to meet in person in California last year, which is really cool. And yeah, so epic to join everyone from all over the world. It's really cool to see a few Aussie representatives in the chat. I'm sure there's a few more Australians here as well, and so many great people in the Southern Hemisphere. So yeah, a bit about me. My journey started in high school. So I was learning about climate change, learning about plastic pollution, all the different challenges that our planet is facing. and I decided to try to make a difference. I didn't want to try to change the world because no one can change the whole world. So I really just tried to focus on what could I do in my own backyard, my own community. So fundraised $100,000 and got solar panels installed at my high school, and then helped over 20 schools follow suit. So well over $1 million of solar in high schools in the state that I live, just from that feeling of concern and just giving it a crack, just taking day by day. And then, yeah, co-founded Plastic Free Cronulla in my local community because we had a lot of our bays being very polluted with plastic pollution. And I love getting in the ocean. As you can tell, my hair's always wet because I love surfing. I love just getting in the ocean as much as possible. So, yeah, I started Plastic Free Cronulla to try to get rid of plastic, and we ended up helping to get single-use plastic. So, plastic straws, cutlery, and a bunch of other items banned in New South Wales, so the largest state of Australia. So now all in New South Wales, there's no more plastic straws and a bunch of other items. And that journey led me to just being on a really, yeah, getting involved with World Ocean Day, going to the United Nations climate conferences and speaking there. I was just over there in Brazil where my documentary played at the end of last year over at COP in Belém. And yeah, just been on this quest to just work out what are the solutions that we can do as young people. And that's led me to starting Blue Minds, which is where I go into schools. And yeah, as it said, last year spoke to 14,500 Australians all over the country, which is always on the road, always delivering talks, because I truly believe that, our generation, young people, have the power to really rewrite the future for the better. And through that storytelling and through that communication, we have such a big opportunity. So, yeah, I'm also a documentary filmmaker as well. So, made a documentary Rising Up, which played at COP last year. It's on Waterbear streaming or on Amazon Prime if anyone's in the US, streaming on Prime Video. And then I've also got a new one coming out in June. So wear a few different hats, but my mission is to just try to look after the ocean through, yeah, I'd say communication's my main sort of ability to do that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Cal, and happy to have you here. Great to talk to you again. And thanks for joining us as a panelist. Our second panelist is Austin from Seattle. Again, he also mentioned a little bit of the work that he does, really, really phenomenal artwork across the Pacific Northwest here in the United States. And I will pass it off to you, Austin, to introduce yourself a little bit.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And thanks, Cal. I'm excited to join you. I'm a huge fan as well. And so, what I do as an artist is I use visual communication. And so, by creating artwork and murals, a lot of public art in places where people will walk by, drive by, and see, I use art and murals as a way to teach people about how to be a better steward in their own community. And so, I've done a lot of public art murals, over 3,000 square feet, that says, but it's just a whole lot of buildings I paint and a whole lot of walls along salmon streams, specifically by doing a community paint day format. So instead of me just painting a mural by myself, I host big events and festivals where we bring in a ton of community members to paint by number these murals and be a part of painting this message themselves. And so I find the key is being able to evolve community in the process of the creating it, which makes it a collaborative piece. And then I'm also an artist in addition. I do a lot of art festivals and painting, and I have my art in a lot of different shops around the area. But as a student at the University of Washington, my focus is marketing and communications and art, and kind of how all three of those can combine to do visual communication. And I've worked with a lot of groups like USGS, Fisheries, and NOAA, and the Department of Fish and Wildlife here in Washington, and then a bunch of state parks to help spread that message.
Awesome, Austin. Yeah, thank you so much for that, and happy to have you join us as well. I think that last little section of your introduction leads us very well into this first question here, because this session two of advocacy training, leadership training, is social media and communication. So we're going to talk about a broad spectrum of topics under that umbrella. And communications itself can look like a lot of different things. So in the context of conservation specifically, how do you define effective communication? What does that look like to you? Give us like two or three sentences. What does effective communication look like to you? I'll pass it to whoever wants to go first.
I'm happy to get started, Austin. I'd say effective communication in terms of like really singling out the word effective is how can you move people's hearts and their minds? And the way that I sort of look at particularly communication when it comes to conservation is like the planet isn't on a great trajectory, and I feel like we've been the science has been clear for decades and decades, and we've sort of been trying to inspire people to take action through, I guess, showing the worst or showing the fear or the sort of trying to get people to act through that place of fear and anger and frustration, which I've experienced in my Australian context, particularly, is that motivation of communication through fear of look at what the future could look like if we don't act, look at all the birds with plastic in their stomachs, look at how bad things are. I've realized that particularly now with even this week, what's been happening across the world, and hope everyone's doing okay with just how turbulent things are geopolitically at the moment because the world is going crazy. And it's something that a lot of people, when they're sort of thinking about conservation or thinking about the environment, they don't really get excited by, because our attention spans are so limited, we're sort of, just focused on just getting by in our day to day. So the way that I sort of try to flip it in terms of effective communication is that heart and mind. And the best way to do that is through a place of love. So again, connecting to that heart and also the mind of what could be better. And there's this quote that I absolutely love, which then I'll pass over to you, Austin. I've got so many quotes that I've just accumulated the last few years, but there's one that I love, particularly for an American context, is that Martin Luther King didn't inspire all this widespread action and widespread reform by saying, I have a nightmare. And I'll leave it over to you, Austin.
I love that, Cal. And I also agree that hearts and minds, that's definitely how to do it. I find making people feel connected to the issue, getting people to have a reason to care and get people invested in why they should care is super important. But I also agree that don't lead with fear. I like to lead with the fun and lead with
Mm.
something that attracts people to get people to show up to an event or be a part of some sort of movement or campaign. And then once you get them there, you can teach and have all this education where you can learn about ways that we could be doing things better. But I like to market all my events, my paint days, as almost like a festival. Like, let's celebrate the salmon, even though, like, yes, this is a problem, and yes, they're declining. And if we don't act, they could potentially go extinct, and they already have locally in some areas. But it's not about leading with fear. It's about giving people a reason to care, making people feel connected and why they should care, and then ultimately let that lead to action and getting the community to take steps to make a difference.
100%. I think both of you gave really great examples there. And we will talk about the role that joy and hope play in conservation messaging. But to get down to the nitty-gritty, in terms of like actually creating a virtual campaign, an event, and promoting it online, and having a call to action that you're putting out there, encouraging people to participate in. There's a lot of things to consider. Like there are so many different elements that some people might not even think of, like what platform to use. How do you, time a post going out correctly? Like what does that look like? So this next set of questions, you can kind of answer all of them at once if that makes sense for you to do. So the first thing is just what are the things to consider when you're trying to develop a promotional strategy for,
Mm.
like I said, event, campaign, or call to action. Um, in that consideration, digital media, traditional media, what does that look like? How can you utilize both, especially in our very phone heavy world that we live
Mm.
in? And then the third question here is what are some like tangible, measurable outcomes that you can look at after, not just after, but like also during, to track your progress and your success and actually see if you're hitting what you consider to be effective communication. I know that's kind of a lot all wrapped in one, but I'll pass it to whoever wants to go first.
I'm happy to kick it off. So I'd say the biggest thing at the starting point with a campaign and communication before sort of thinking about what the right mix is and what the outcomes and what sort of the goals are is sort of knowing, yeah, I guess what the end goal is. So are you sort of painting a mural because you just want to paint it, or is it because you want to raise awareness about salmon in your local area? Or are you starting a social media campaign because you want your local politician or local member of parliament to think differently about plastic pollution? So just really working out what is that end goal at the starting point, and then how do you sort of work back from that and work out, all right, well, what is the right mix? And I'd say with every campaign that I've ever done, So giving Plastic Free Cronulla is a perfect example of that. So we were able to work with the Prime Minister at the time and sort of help on big federal plastics pieces right down to local council. And so what we did was build this mix of media, which I think is really, really important. So again, working out what's within your control. And there's never been a better time as a young change maker to be able to drive messaging, to be able to drive campaigns, because there are so many tools, mostly available for free as well, that can really help you deliver that message. So it could be, for example, utilizing local shops using their windows. And do you have a sticker or a poster that you put on those local windows? So yeah, that in-person media is so, so important to add the credibility. If you can try to move things into the offline world, it does add so much credibility. And what we did with Plastic Free Cronulla was had a lot of different stickers that we'd put on shop front windows. It would be Plastic Free Cronulla, or would have certificates to say they're a plastic free champion. And that added so much credibility. So then when we're doing all the digital media as well, so the reels, the posts, the stories, getting people to in-person events, like it was this really nice mix of messaging. And then in terms of the outcomes as well to take into consideration, it just goes back to what is your goal? Because maybe your goal is to just change the way people think about a certain issue. And so the way that you can do that is then potentially a pre-survey, or understand where people are at, and then maybe after, how their views on a certain issue have changed, but also what the particular reach is and how you can, is it petition signatures, or is it meetings with politicians, or is it just individual consumer choices? And it's really easy to do that through surveys. And again, like we live in such an incredible time to be able to, yeah, use all these incredible tools to get everything that we need. So they're really, yeah, it's never been a better time to be a campaigner and to be able to get these messages across.
Yeah, Austin.
Hal, I love that. And I like how you talked about in-person media because I'm a marketing major in college and I study all the different forms of digital media, physical media. And I think a mural is quite the extreme version of physical media, like meeting someone right where they're at, which is on the street corner, look right in front of a stream, looking up at a building. And I think there's a really interesting connection there to marketing because I'm studying like billboards and out of home
Mm.
advertisements. And the ultimate goal of something like a billboard is to reach people where they're at, where they see it, and have some sort of message that teaches people something or gets people to normally buy something if it's a billboard. But a mural is like a collaborative community billboard that I get 100-foot building and I get to put a message on this building to teach people how to care and be a better steward. And so the message that I like to use that platform for is a lot of my murals say, this salmon spawning stream is in our care. And it's not my care, it's not your care, it's our care. And I'm not the artist, the sole one who's painting it. I'm working with a community paint day where we have 300 volunteers coming out to paint by number, and it's the community that's the ones that are painting that. And so when I say it's in our care, it's literally the people who painted the message in our care. And it's not just that shared sense of ownership in the mural, like we helped paint it, but it also translates to a shared sense of ownership in the stream. And that's ultimately the goal that I want from a campaign, is for the community to have that shared ownership of this is our stream to take care of. And by collaboratively involving the community and creating that message and then leaving it as a permanent piece of artwork that that community gets to see every single day they drive down that street, that's that constant reminder of this stream is in our care. And that's ultimately what I want to take away. And I found what works well, almost like a billboard for a mural.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is a really excellent transition into how to actually get the community involved. So knowing your audience is definitely a big component of putting together campaigns, whether you're focusing in person or online, but especially in terms of like social media and specifically, knowing your target audience is one of the most crucial steps if you want to actually have the reach that you're looking for. We will talk a little bit towards the end about like virality and going viral and what that can look like, but that's not always the goal. Going viral is not always the goal. So when we're trying to be really direct and specific, How do you find your target audience? Like, what do you need to know about the people who you're reaching out to or looking for? What does that look like to you? Austin, I'll throw that to you first.
Yeah, well, when I think about Save Our Salmon, I think about there being like three rings of my audience. Like the inner ring's the local community. It's the people who live along a stream or a river where the salmon actually spawn. The middle ring would be like the broader environmental community who might be following along with these issues and who cares about it, but wants to stay in more involved. And then that outer ring is just the general public. It's the people who are walking down the street and have no clue there's even a stream here. And when I have something like a mural, I don't get to control who sees it. It's anyone who walks down the street. And so the message has to be simple enough that the general public can still find inspiration from it and find a message, but also complicated and detailed enough that if you live there, if you're a local, and if you care about the environment, that there's something deeper for you to be able to take action from. And so the your fish, your river message really resonates with locals more. But then the environmental community might want like actionable steps and data and what they can actually do. And then it just has to be striking enough to catch people's attention if you have no clue about the idea at all. And so I try to create art that can reach and be simple enough, but complex enough for all three of those.
Yeah, definitely. Cal, go ahead.
That's so good. I love Austin, the splitting of the different target market and the sort of audience and knowing how to speak to each of those. The way also like to think about the rings is you've also got like the different sort of audiences, but then also with campaigning and sort of communications, how do you actually bring people closer through this like wave or ladder of engagement? So you have the sort of outer realm, which might be they see a mural, they see a billboard, they see a thing on social media. So how do you sort of, I guess, essentially build a funnel so you have the awareness into those key core supporters and volunteers and people taking action? So with your audience as well, it's really important to understand how much they are engaging in your campaign and initiative. So, for example, going back to my political election, which is another sort of communication campaign, what we're able to do is heaps of signs on people's front yards. There was a lot of social media, a lot of things to build a base awareness to sort of get the word out as a first sort of point of the funnel. And then the next thing was, okay, well, how do you turn those people to sort of go a bit deeper and how do you get them to actually start to champion and build that word of mouth? So then the next sort of layer of communication was letterbox dropping different people, in-person events where you sort of educate them, and then they start to become the great messengers of things. And then the next tier down was actually people volunteering their time. And so then they're the ones that are really bought in. So in terms of campaigns and sort of running different initiatives and strategies, you need to have communication to appeal to all of those different audiences, not just the demographics or psychographics, so what their age, what their location is, or what their interests are. But you actually need to also tailor your communication as an audience to what level of engagement they have in your campaign. And ultimately, if you do want to achieve a goal of whatever it is, you need to have people around you and you need to have a team and you need to build that word of mouth. So thinking of the communication, not just from where they are from the demographics or the psychographics, but also how engaged they are in your campaign as well. So yeah, that's something. And as well, just sort of looking at some of the other questions of whose voices and perspectives are centered in your messaging. Again, it's very different for each demographic or psychographic. So, for example, with Plastic Free Cronulla and getting all the business community to switch out from plastic items to non-plastic items, we would get some of the biggest businesses in the local area to be champions and then to talk to all their peers. Because sometimes you're not the right messenger for the message. So it's really making sure that you get the right people to speak to yeah, the sort of right audiences as well. So you have to acknowledge at some point as well that you might not be the right messenger for that particular audience. But yeah, how do you bring people in that are?
Yeah, absolutely, Cal. Austin, do you have anything to add to this second section here, excuse me, about reaching mixed audiences like Cal was talking about, and just general accessibility and determining how to integrate different perspectives into the messaging?
I do. And I really liked what Cal said about you may not be the right messenger. And I find for me, I'm just an artist. When I started, I was a 16-year-old high schooler who liked to paint. And what I find was the key is that since I'm not a biologist, I'm not a salmon expert, I'm not someone who his job is to research streams. It's that I got to work with and involve and bring in those experts who work with these problems every day and let them speak and give them the platform. And so while I may be the one who's organizing and hosting this big community paint day event, I ultimately got to bring in and collaborate with a bunch of groups. One of them's called North Lake Washington Salmon Watchers. And there's a biology professor at the University of Washington who studies kokanee salmon and sockeye and how to do all these specific restoration projects. And there's work groups who are going in and doing stream restoration. And so my role is almost more to have the marketing and communications to get the community excited about these initiatives and get the community to care, but then to turn the platform over to the experts who can really get people involved in the next steps and what to do from there. And so I
Yeah.
get to take some of that research and make it fun to participate in, and then ultimately let them help involved. And that means I get to
Mm,
speak to like city government and local, and then environmental groups and art groups. And so there's a lot of different audiences and there's a huge range. But the ultimate goal is how can I turn it over to the experts to be able to take action?
Definitely. And I think that
mm.
actually lends itself very well to um, engaging with other folks' perspectives in there as well, the experts on the issue, because they will be able to tell you very clearly and specifically which uh, community groups, specific demographics are particularly tapped in to certain issues. And oftentimes certain community groups and certain demographics are already doing work on certain issues as well. And so you can often use your own network of experts if you're, in your case, Austin, an artist, or Cal, a politician and youth organizer. You have your kind of niche immediate networks who then have their own networks, and you can kind of use that strategically to bring in as many people as possible. Um,
Definitely. I might just add, Laura, as
yeah.
well. Also thinking of who are some unlikely allies and audiences.
Mhm.
So a lot of the time we always think sort of a certain way. So actually like thinking outside the box and think, all right, who's a potential unlikely ally? So in a lot of the surfing campaigns that are happening in terms of banning offshore oil, offshore gas in Australia, one of the unlikely sort of key allies that's really been driving the fight is actually the surf industry. So surfers, so we've partnered, for example, my Blue Minds initiative with Surfing Australia. So it's a really interesting ally in terms of you wouldn't necessarily think surfers that, just sort of don't care too much about, I guess, what happens to the ocean, but they definitely have that love. So how do you sort of think of who are those unlikely allies that you could sort of bring in because they're also going to bring in a completely different audience that can complement the one that you're building as well?
Yeah, I love that addition, Cal. Unlikely allies are largely untapped. That's why they are unlikely. And I think
Mm,
that sporting and recreation is a really excellent, I guess, sector to
mm.
tap into for stuff like this for sure. Awesome. Thank you guys for your insights on this. This is fantastic. So going back to a little bit more what we were talking about earlier is the messaging itself. So we've gone through, how do you find your audience? How do you make a plan? And now it actually comes down to putting the information out there and what does that look like? And both of you have already kind of touched on, appealing to the hearts and minds and the ethos, pathos, logos, if those some of you guys are familiar of those concepts of how to appeal to people's reasoning and their emotions and all of that. And you've already definitely both of you have already touched on some of these questions, but we'll start with this first section here. How can storytelling and the creative arts in general be leveraged as a tool for social change? And again, you guys have already touched on this as well. What was your most successful case of communications and messaging? And why do you think it's a good example of that? So I'll pass it over to whoever wants to go first for that section.
I can start.
Go for it.
So look, storytelling is honestly the most important, and the arts as well. Like if you like the most important thing for humans to connect to. Like if you go back to sort of caveman days, like humans have always gathered around a fire. We've always told stories. Like we are a storytelling species. Like that is how information is always passed from generation to generation. So, and then yeah, in Australia we've got the oldest living continual culture in the world. It goes back to 65 plus thousand years. And in terms of the creative arts, like you go to different First Nations artifact sites and there's beautiful paintings. Like the arts and stories have always, um, I guess, moved humans to sort of be aware of, hey, don't walk out at night because a tiger might eat you sort of thing. Like humans have always communicated through stories, which is why it is so, so important that we really try to tell a story of positivity and a story of hope and really put particularly young people in this story because I think the story that a lot of us feel at the moment, which sort of ties into a little bit of the question too of that eco anxiety, is that the story that we're told as young people is that we don't have a role to play, that we're too young, we're not old enough, we're not rich enough, we're not knowledgeable enough. We just have to sit on the sidelines and let the adults make all the decisions. So the story that we really need to try to tell is how young people, how every single person can do what's within their control and actually help to rewrite the future for the better, to get involved and make sure the future isn't written for us, but we're actually taking action and making sure the future is written by us. And a really great, I guess, like experience personally of how I've seen that is like, I think film is such a powerful way to communicate stories. And my documentary, Rising Up, it's been touring in cinemas and festivals, and it's been seen by over 100,000 students here in Australia, which is really cool. And I always get emails and letters, and people sort of reach out to say how much has inspired them. And an example of sort of, I mean, the whole film premise is just really trying to unpack what we can do to take action. And I've traveled across Indonesia and the Pacific and Australia to really just try to understand that. But an example to sort of understand how it's been a successful case of communication to sort of achieve that goal of getting young people to take action is that there was this young girl who reached out and she was telling me that after she watched the film, she felt really inspired and started a recycling program at her school to recycle plastic bottle caps. And so she's recycled 3,500 plastic bottle caps to turn them into prosthetics and wheelchairs just because she felt inspired from watching the film. So yeah, I think like storytelling, films, the creative arts, like just being able to tap out of the, I guess, reality, but actually tap into something that's positive, that hope, that future that could look so much better. And that sort of ties into this second point of this urgency without causing eco anxiety and burnout. So eco anxiety in Australia and probably across the world, it's impacting in Australia 2 in 3 young Australians. It is such a big problem. Like so many young people are so concerned about the future, and I've seen so many incredible people also get really burnt out in the environment space. So I think what we really need to focus on is if we're too urgent, if we're like, hey, we need to do this right now, like that's not going to excite people. That's not going to get people into the tent to make everyone take action. So we really need to try to find that balance of our passion and our sense of urgency, our fact that we know that we need to do this yesterday, with the reality that by communicating that way, we're not going to bring people in. And if we don't bring people in, we're not going to solve the problem. So you need to find that balance to not be seen to be urgent, to be seen to be desperate, but keep that internal as much as you can. Have people around you that you can be open to, but public facing communication, really just trying to focus on, yeah, making sure you can bring people in the tent. And as Austin said, through that love, through that fun, like that's what's really going to bring people in when they don't necessarily, if you're painting a mural and you're having a good time, you might not necessarily think about what's going on, or if you go to a beach cleanup, or if you go to fun events, and then yeah, you're not sort of going from that place of doom and the world's going to end. So yeah, that's really important, and particularly that place of love. Like we've found that really just sharing gratitude and getting people to reflect on why they love their own local community has really helped to reduce eco anxiety in Australia.
Totally, Cal. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Austin, let's hear your example of your most successful communications example.
Yeah. Well, I love that what Cal was saying, just about how people need to see an example of another young person that's doing something and it really sparks something and inspires people to take action themselves. And so I'd say one example that was pretty successful was I worked on this project. It was a film called the Inspiring Young Heroes documentary. And they have a bunch of different features as students in inspiringyoungheroes.org. And I was featured in one of these films that now the goal is they play it in a bunch of different classrooms all across the United States. And so by showing an example of, hey, here's a problem in one community, like in Seattle, salmon streams are one problem. In your community, the problem could be any number of different environmental things, or even anything for that matter. And by seeing an example of how one person used a skill that they have, even if it's not related, even if being an artist isn't related to salmon declining, it's about how you can take whatever skill you have and put it into action. And so after that film, I've gotten all sorts of different emails or letters from students from different schools saying, oh, we watched your video in class, or this inspired me to start something else. And I think my favorite part is just seeing the ripple effect of
Mm.
how I could never know who's going to see something or never know who's going to show up to an event. And if I host a paint day and one 10-year-old who shows up to help paint the mural decides to start their own project because now they care more, that's what's really, really exciting to me.
Mm.
And so the most successful projects are, to me, the ones that inspire other people to start their own things or to get involved in even deeper ways.
Yeah, totally. And I
Well,
think to Cal's point, what he was saying earlier about the eco anxiety and burnout, being able to bring people under the tent, and really show them a good time and show them that this work is very much rooted in community, and really resonates with your point of, we need as many people in this as possible, and it doesn't really matter what you're good at. Whatever skill set you have a way of telling that story and putting that out there as an example for other people to follow. Um, Austin, do you have any insight on creating that sense of urgency in regards to eco anxiety and burnout, and what are your thoughts on solution oriented narratives?
Yeah, well, I think that's the key. It's solution oriented. You can talk about the problem, and maybe that's what gets people to take the initial action to show up. But what I try to do in my artwork is capture the beauty of nature and what a stream full of salmon looks like. Even though my first mural I painted along Juanita Creek, which only had 3 salmon that year return to spawn. And instead of painting 3 salmon in a mural or a stream with no fish or a lot of like more sad or depressing artwork, I was like, how can I make this colorful and vibrant to catch people's attention and remind people of this is what we're fighting for. This is the vision of what we want. And so, of course, it's important to have the balance of both, but I like to have a solution oriented, fun key because maybe people will take action for the first time because of fear, because they're scared. But if it's not fun and something that they enjoy being able to do, and if it's not a meaningful way to contribute, then people won't keep coming back. And for the long-term engagement, I think having a solution that's fun and gets people with a sense of community, if you're working with others in the group to be able to do a stream restoration project, I think that makes it more attractive and exciting to be able to keep showing up to these events if it's something that's fun and full of hope and optimism
mm,
rather than working out of fear where you feel guilty.
100%. There's a quote as well. It says, you attract more bees with honey. So I think that's a quite a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that um this last question here, I mean, both of you have already touched on it. What role does hope play in effective environmental communication? It's literally the fact that people are doing anything at all, I think, is just to kind of tie this up. I think that especially Gen Z, Gen Alpha, like young people these days, there is so much doom and gloom. Like it really just I see so often young people feel like there's nothing that they can do. The adults who are currently in charge all over the world, not just in the United States, but around the globe, are not listening to young people. And in many cases, that is very much true. But I think that there are some very important cases of intergenerational collaboration. And I think that hope, when you see what other people are doing in their own communities and you see the impact that people are able to have, all around the world, whether it's a young person or an adult or a group of people or an individual, it doesn't really matter. It's just, talking about that is incredibly important. And that's why we're having this conversation in the first place. Um, Here, let's go to the next slide. Don't remember which one this one is. Oh, okay. So going viral. I mentioned this earlier. Um, so going viral is definitely a goal for some folks on the internet these days, especially on apps like TikTok and you know, working with the algorithm to kind of optimize everything. And that definitely does make sense for some campaigns. But for others, like a more localized, specific audience that has to do with like a community-based campaign or call to action, it doesn't always make sense. So the first question here, what makes a campaign successful beyond the reach? Like, how do you actually measure that? What does that look like to you? Whoever wants to go first can go ahead.
Yeah, for me, it's impact over impressions every time. Like a post can get a million views and change nothing depending on who sees it. So I like to measure success of maybe did a school start a salmon education unit because they saw the mural or participated, or like did a city council member show up to a painting event and then start doing more on local water quality, or maybe a kid who participated in a mural project goes on to start their own environmental initiative. And I think that's what matters to me more so than the reach and how many people see it. It's what people do of the people who do see it.
Yeah, and how do you sort of build that atmosphere and that cultural environment where ultimately I feel like the policy is the end goal. Like it's all we can do as many beach cleanups as possible, which is really important to restore the damage that's being done. But until we get the policy to turn the tap off plastics, for example, or to sort of drive that change. So yeah, that's where I sort of focus. A lot of my success is based on those policy outcomes. So yeah, it'd be different for every campaign, and there's so many different ways as well to sort of build that environment. I mean, for viral content, social media, like there's so much knowledge out there in terms of the hooks and the ways to sort of make sure that your content does reach new audiences. On Instagram, you can do trial reels, for example, which is a great way to reach new audiences there. But in terms of actually like building this campaign, there's also ways that you can use different types of media. So, for example, your local newspaper, how do you write letters to the editor, which is something, again, it's free, it gets the word out there. And if you can create this cultural environment, it means that for policymakers, myself being one now, I know when my community really want to see a strong policy go through because I can feel that pressure. I get the emails, I can see the murals, I can see, the people showing up for these events, and I know that it's really important to do that. So I feel like a lot of the time when it comes to campaigns, we just focus on, yeah, as Austin said, impressions or this sort of one key metric, but how to actually really, yeah, focus on that impact and bring that multi-channel approach through different media. But yeah, in terms of the viral content piece as well, it's also how can you leverage PR as much as possible. So your local paper, local radio, um, news bulletins, like there's so many different other channels, which is what a lot of politicians look at. And I've also got a lot of politicians as sort of tapped into every time their name is mentioned in media, they get an alert. So if you are on the radio and you mention the local councillor's name or the governor or whoever it is, they'll get that alert and that'll sort of start to let them know that, particularly in Australia, a lot of them have that software. So yeah, there's a lot of these journalists as well are looking for stories. And if you do have that positive story that is, and especially with different AI tools now, it's really easy to write a media release. So you can easily write a release, send it across to journalists and say, hey, here's a positive story of young people trying to make the planet a little bit better. So yeah, social media is one thing. I'd also really encourage everyone to look at these different channels because yeah, all these newspapers, radios, TV, they always are looking for stories. And if you sort of package it up, you can definitely reach a lot of people that way as well.
Totally, totally. And I think to your point, Cal, the use of the multi platform communications is really huge. And I'm gonna actually combine these last two questions because they're very similar. How do you create viral content that
Mm.
translates to action and impact and outcomes for conservation? But then also, how do you sustain support and engagement long term instead of just one-time engagement campaigns? And the reason I want to
Mm.
combine them is because when people go viral, a lot of the times it is a one-time engagement, especially like I used TikTok as an example before. Um, people will have like one video just go like completely massively viral for like no real discernible reason other than the algorithm just happened to really like that specific piece of content. And that makes doing a call to action in that way a little bit tricky. So how can you actually harness views and reach and impact on social media and actually translate that into in-person action?
Mm.
Whoever has insights on that can go ahead first.
Yeah, I can start. I think sort of building that, like what I was saying before, of that funnel. If you do have a reel that goes really viral, or like a, a event that sort of reaches a lot of people, like that is incredible to have that as the sort of first point of the funnel, that awareness. But how do you keep translating that awareness into those supporters that are engaged long term in the campaign should always be the goal. And so with I guess the long-term versus one-time engagement, going back to what Austin said about trying to build the ripple, that is like the mantra of what I'm trying to do in Australia, because so often in the environmental movement, it's always focused on these one-off engagements. It's these one-off waves of action. It's, hey, here's the protest. Everyone, let's get involved. And it's this big wave. But what happens with the wave is that it, uses a lot of energy, but then it also takes a lot away. It takes away sand, it takes away a lot of the foundational structures because people put so much into it. Sometimes you get a result, but sometimes you don't, and then you're left with a lower base. But what's really important with campaigning and messaging and communication is to focus on building the ripple, because the ripple, as Austin said, it spreads. So you build that ripple with someone, and then you never know what direction it goes. If you think of a nice lake of water and you throw a rock into it, and that ripple, it goes in so many different directions, and then that connects with another ripple, and it just permeates beyond you could ever believe. And the more that we can build these ripples now, particularly engaging these new voices, engaging new people in the space, that's what's really going to create this long-term systematic cultural change that we really need in our planet. So yeah, everything that I've always done has just been really focused on building that ripple and really focusing on that long-term engagement, but also acknowledging what is the end goal. Because if the end goal, for example, in my case with Plastic Free Cronulla, it was to get these 5 items that we were targeting banned in New South Wales. So when we did that, the campaign and the organizations completely shifted. So we're not trying to get people to do the exact same thing. So if you can set that end goal, you know where the destination is. That's where you can really build that ripple towards. As opposed to if you don't know what that end goal is and you just keep encouraging people to keep showing up for the same events without that collective understanding of what we are striving towards, then that's where you get people drop off and people sort of look at what the next thing is or just lose excitement towards it because you're not getting those outcomes, you're not getting that gratification. So yeah, I hope that helps to sort of answer those two questions, which
Yeah.
are great.
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, to your point, Cal, Austin, your ripple metaphor, perfect for this. Absolutely perfect. Do you have
Mm.
anything to add?
Yeah, well, I think the creating something that translates into action starts with making the barrier to action as low and as easy as possible. And so if I want people to show up to a community paint day as the first step, I have to make that something so easy that a 7-year-old can join and a 77-year-old can join. And so I can't require people to have any art experience. I try to make it as simple as possible. All you have to do is be able to hold a paintbrush and paint a solid color on a wall. That's all you need to take the first step. And then once we're there, how do we sustain people long term? It's about, first of all, getting people to care deeper than maybe the initial reason that brought them to the event, and then connecting people with the experts in the groups that will be able to join long term stream restoration events and places they can tap into and be able to contribute even further. And so I think it's a combination between the two. It's making the first step super easy to get involved, but then connecting people with a long-term place that they can channel that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys both for your insights. We have only about 5, 10 minutes left for questions. So I'm going to skip this last slide. If Cal and Austin, I will say if you do have specific individuals, organizations, brands, or tools that you look to for inspiration or just things that you have found to be really, really helpful for you, I will ask that you drop them in the chat, just so we can make some time for questions. So, as we've been going through all of these slides, there have been so many different points to touch on. I feel like advocacy training is a four-part series, and the social media and communications, I mean, really all four of the sections could be their own series because it's such a large umbrella and there's so many different topics to cover. But I really want to encourage everybody, if you do have any questions for our panelists, let us know. We can talk about the ins and outs of like social media calendars to figure out like a posting schedule. We could talk about, really, really specific messaging points that you guys have found to be helpful. And so feel free to send your questions in the chat. Feel free to use the Q&A feature. But to Austin and Cal, while we're waiting for questions to come in, I will just ask you to sum up what is like the number one piece of advice for young people who are just getting started in the world of social media and communications.
I can start with social media. I'd say the quantity is really important. So yeah, just trying to like the way the algorithms are set up now, like Instagram and Meta and TikTok reward people that are posting frequently. So yeah, knowing that, and then also designing your content in a way that is exciting for people. It does have those hooks, and because again, it's that algorithm. Unfortunately, when we are using social media, we are at um, the sort of mercy of these major tech platforms. So yeah, just sort of acknowledging that as well as the starting point. But it looks like there's quite a few questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Austin, I'll pass to you to give your number one piece of advice, and then we do have a question here in the Q&A.
My advice would be don't do it alone. You have your own unique skills, and so many people have different skills, and teamwork and joining up with other organizations, with other groups, with other students or people who are just as passionate about it as you is definitely going to be a huge key to what I found.
Yeah, I would second that. Community is a huge, huge part of this. And it also goes back to the eco anxiety and burnout conversation before as well. Like you really cannot get through all of that alone. Yeah, thank you, Austin and Cal, for those insights. Our first question here is from Doreen. In a community with barriers in terms of language, what tools of communication are advisable to use? That's an excellent question. I think there's a lot of different answers, but I'm interested to see what you guys have to say.
Well, I can start by saying that art is the most universal language, that no matter what language you speak, you can look at art and you can see a picture and you can hopefully understand what it's trying to tell you. And so that's the main mode of communication I use is visual. And that's
Mm.
one way to approach it.
Definitely. And also, yeah, understanding what are the different languages, if you are doing posters or social media and sort of making sure that it is accessible and you are speaking. But that sort of goes back to the first piece of knowing your audience. So knowing, yeah, what languages they speak, who they're engaging with already, where are they getting their news from, and yeah, making sure that your communication is accessible so you do reach all those different yeah, areas of your community and the audience that you want to tackle and address.
Yeah, definitely. And I would also add that like for social media specifically, there are a lot of like automated translation tools. Like you'll see if there's something that comes across your feed in a different language, there is usually a translate button. But to Cal's point, like if you are living in a community where there's a lot of different languages spoken, I would recommend excuse me, putting out all of your captions in multiple languages. If English is the primary language, have that one be first. If Spanish is the secondary, have that one be third. And if like Tagalog is the third, for example, like you could have that be the tertiary language. And then, yeah, I mean, I know Google Translate is like not always ideal, but we will talk about campaign organizing, I believe, in the next session. I have to remember off the top of my head, we switched some things around. But that will also be part of that conversation in the next session because it also has to do with who is on your team when you're doing this organizing work. Because if you have multilingual people on your team, that will make bringing that barrier down a lot easier as well. So that's a great question. And then this next question that we have is What can you suggest for student leaders here who are promoting SDG 14 but lack the financial resources to make projects or activities? So SDGs, for those of you who don't know, are the Sustainable Development Goals developed by the United Nations. I don't remember off the top of my head which one number 14 is. Austin or Cal, do you happen
It's
to know?
life
Life
below
below.
water.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
most important SDG, life
I
below
know, I
water.
should know this. I should.
It's one of the least funded SDGs. So it is so, so tough. All of us working in the ocean space to, yeah, if you look at sort of the disparity of SDGs. So yeah, in terms of I guess like the finding resources and funding, looking at grants in your own area, but also like there's never been a better time with all the tools that we've got to really drive particularly communication and projects using all of the different softwares and yeah, like the barrier to entry is so, so low compared to 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So yeah, in terms of promoting the sustainable development goal and promoting your campaigns, just really trying to realize like, yeah, I mean, it depends on what type of campaign and how large you want to go, but just start small, get those runs on the board. And then as you keep building and growing, then you can attract funding for your projects as well.
I agree with all of that. And especially in the United States, a lot of the groups that would give grants or do funding, like NOAA or USGS that I've worked with, are getting a lot of their funding cut. And so for Life Below
Mm.
Water, as Cal mentioned, the most underfunded, it's about how can you find those grants, even if they're local or even if they're in other categories, like if there's grants for art projects or grants for broader environmental or even other ways that you can help fund the work you're doing, because it is so important and it is so important to help educate people. And part of that's about involving the people who are working on it from the below water perspective. And that's a lot of the scientists and the researchers diving and how can I involve those people is always the question I'm asking.
Mm.
Yeah, and I would also add get creative with your partnerships, intersectional,
Mm.
generational, which will lead us into our last question here, inter-industry partnerships and just looking for creative ways to find where the dollars are because it is not just in the United States that these groups are getting their funding cut. Unfortunately, it is kind of across the board around the world, and we just need to be creative as much as we can. And so I will end. We have about 3 minutes left, so we'll try to make this one quick because I do still have some just updates and announcements for programming. But this last question is going to be from Arlian. In a time when young generations feel like they have all the responsibility, how can we communicate about sustainability in a way that truly connects across generations so that young people, parents, educators, and leaders feel inspired to listen to each other and work together towards real solutions? I love that question. Love that question. And I think it's a wonderful place to end. So, Austin, Cal, whoever wants to go first, take it away.
You go, Austin. I'm quickly typing away for Maria's question
Of
into the
course.
chat
Well,
as
it
well.
starts with the accessibility of being able to create an event or some sort of film or something that anybody can participate in and be a part of. And so when I'm designing a community paint day, I'm thinking about how to make it as accessible as possible for as many people, multi-generational. Like we can have grandparents, parents, and then granddaughters and grandsons side by side, all painting the same project together, just because of how I'm able to lower the barrier of make a simple enough design, make a simple enough message that lots of people can resonate with. But then the goal is that there's enough elements to it that different people will connect with different parts and hopefully be able to realize that as maybe the grandson talks to their grandma that, hey, when you were growing up, this stream had thousands and thousands of salmon that the stream used to be painted red every fall. And now what's happened to it? What's the problem? And be able to see some of that because it literally has happened within one or two lifetimes, the salmon decline here in Seattle. And so the
Mhm.
communication between generations and creating a place for all the generations to come together and talk about this issue and their different time perspectives of it is super critical.
100%. And the only thing I'd add is also just focusing on your local community as well. And that's one thing that everyone can tap into is a love for their own place and particularly for people who might not believe in climate change or might not already be on the bandwagon or on the journey of sort of taking action themselves. everyone has that own connection to their place. And I think, yeah, what you do, Austin, is so cool to really get people in for those events to use art as a way to inspire those conversations. Yeah, so epic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just add meeting people where they're at, because Cal, to your point, we need to have as many people involved with this stuff as possible, regardless of if they are 100% on board with the specifics of certain issues. And it's a tricky business, but that is why we have these conversations on how to interact with them. And I think just having really strong respect for people. Respect does go both ways. We need to make sure that the older generations are also respecting the younger generations, because we really do know what we're talking about, contrary to popular belief. But we do definitely want to, reach out and share those little olive branches where we can, for sure. Okay, so session 3, yes, I got it right. Next week is campaign organizing. And then session 4 after that is event planning and fundraising. Please note, we are doing a little bit of a time change. Daylight savings is switching over on Sunday. That is tomorrow, for those of us here in the United States. Cal, it's already tomorrow for you, for
Mm.
the other hemisphere. And just please note that the time is still the same. It is at 6 and 7 p.m. Eastern. Um, we have it here. I think that's Universal Standard Time. Sessions 1 and 2 have been UTC -5. Session 3 and 4 are UTC -4. So just double check. All of the information is on the World Ocean Day website, where you originally were able to sign up for this session. So please just be sure to check a local time change converter if you have to, or figure it out however you need to. But yeah, we have campaign organizing and then event planning and fundraising coming up after this. Um, Next thing, all of the recordings for all of the sessions will be available on the World Ocean Day YouTube channel a couple of days after the fact. Session 1 is currently on YouTube. This one will be up probably Monday or Tuesday. We already got a question about this in the Q&A earlier in the day. For the feedback survey, we will be sending out a post-program feedback survey after session 4. And if you are able to submit that by the given deadline when it's sent out, you will earn a certificate of completion. That is pretty standard practice for all advocacy training or leadership training programs. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. So that's sort of what you can expect from here on out. And then if you do have any questions about anything related to World Ocean Day, the Ocean Project, advocacy training, leadership training, Youth Advisory Council, anything like that, please email my wonderful colleague, Jihyun Lee, at theoceanproject.org. She is really, really wonderful. She stepped into my role after I left as programs manager for the Ocean Project, and she's doing a great job. So if you have any questions, please email her. And lastly, thank you, Austin, so much for joining us. Thank you, Cal, so much for joining us. It is always a pleasure chatting in these calls, getting to chat with former Youth Advisory Council members, and of course, young people who are making an impact in their community all around the world. Thank you for taking time out of your day, out of your weekend, to join us here. And everybody watching, I hope to see you next week, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for joining and thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.